Have you ever stopped to think about why we tell the stories we do? Turns out the kinds of stories a culture creates are a perfect mirror of how that society actually works. Its power structures, its biggest fears, and what it's reaching for. So today, we're going to take a little journey from the massive spectacles of 16th century England all the way to the biting political satires we see now, to figure out how our stories have changed right alongside our world.
So let's jump in our time machine. Picture this, you're in Tudor England. And this is not some quiet, buttoned-up world. Oh no, it's a place of huge drama, big contrasts. Everything is a public display. Life itself kind of felt like a performance on this massive grand stage, from the royal court right down to the town square.
And I mean that literally. Justice wasn't something that happened quietly behind closed doors. It was a form of public entertainment. A really grim show, sure, but a show nonetheless. It was all designed to reinforce order and to show everyone, very clearly, who was in charge. The town square was basically a theater of consequences. And these punishments, wow, they were designed to be terrifying public theater. Crimes had these very specific, gruesome consequences that were performed for everybody to see. We're talking about being boiled or burned alive, or the absolute horror of being quartered for treason. Even for smaller crimes, you could end up in the pillory, which is basically a stage for public shame. This was a society built on these really raw, in-your-face displays of power.
And this love for spectacle, it went all the way to the top. When the Spanish Armada was sailing to attack England, Queen Elizabeth I didn't just hide out in a palace. No, she got on a white horse, rode out to Tilbury, and became this warrior queen to fire up her army. It was the ultimate performance of power and unity, a living, breathing, epic story unfolding in real time.
So, in a world that operates on this kind of grand, public scale, what kind of stories do you think people told? What kind of writing would really take off in a culture built around kings, queens, and public judgment?
Well, the answer had to be drama, right? The theater was the perfect medium to hold a mirror up to the Elizabethan age. It was public, it was larger than life, and it could handle the massive, epic themes that defined their entire world.
And you can see this connection so clearly on the stage itself. You had masters like Shakespeare taking old forms like tragedy and comedy and pointing them at these huge themes of war and fate and history. The characters mirrored the social ladder, the stories were about kings and queens, not your average person, because their lives had consequences for the entire nation. It made theater this shared public ritual that basically confirmed the way the world worked right outside the theater walls.
Okay, but that's a huge leap, isn't it? We went from watching the downfall of kings on a public stage to curling up at home and reading about the private thoughts of ordinary people. How in the world did that happen? What could possibly cause such a massive shift in the way we tell stories? Well, to answer that, we have to look outside of literature for a minute, because what happened was a complete restructuring of society itself. A new world was taking shape, and that new world needed a totally new kind of story.
A few huge shifts really paved the way. First, you've got Gutenberg's printing press, which suddenly made books way more accessible. Then, the Reformation started to challenge the old, top-down authority of the church. By the 18th century, you have the Age of Reason, which is all about logic and the power of the individual. And all of this together created something totally new. A middle class that could read, had some money, and was eager for stuff to read.
And here's the crucial point. This new reading public, they weren't all that interested in the fates of some distant king or an ancient Greek hero. They were dealing with things like making money, social status, morality, just the stuff of daily life. They were craving stories that felt, well, recognizable. Stories about people like them, facing problems they could actually understand.
So, this new demand from this new audience, it led to the invention of a completely revolutionary art form, one that would pretty much define the modern literary world as we know it.
Enter the novel. It actually comes from the Italian word novella, which means new, and it was exactly that. A long story written in regular prose, not fancy poetry, and, this is the key part, it was grounded in realism. It wasn't made for a big stage, it was designed to be held in your hands as a single book, a private experience. I mean, just look at this comparison. It shows you exactly how the novel was custom-built for its new audience. You go from a public spectacle about kings to a private reading experience about ordinary people. Epic themes about the fate of nations were replaced by the struggles of daily life. And the grand, poetic language of the stage gave way to realistic writing that felt immediate and true. But here's where it gets really powerful. This new form wasn't just about showing reality.
Its realism gave it a new kind of power, the power not just to entertain, but to critique, to comment, and maybe even to persuade.
Right, because a novel could build a world that felt completely believable and fill it with characters you could relate to. That meant writers could explore really complex social and political ideas in a way that was super accessible and gripping. Suddenly, a story could be a powerful argument in disguise.
And one of the cleverest ways to do that is with something called an allegory. An allegory is basically a story with two levels. You have the surface story, what you're literally reading on the page. And then there's this second, hidden story underneath, which is usually a commentary on real-world politics or religion or some big moral idea.
And if you want the perfect example of this in action, you don't have to look any further than George Orwell's incredible book, Animal Farm. On the surface, it's just a simple fable about some farm animals who kick out their human farmer to run the farm themselves. But underneath that simple story, it is a blistering critique of one of the biggest political events of the 20th century.
This is how the allegory works so brilliantly. Every single character and event on the farm maps directly onto the Russian Revolution. Old Major, the pig who has the original dream, he's like Karl Marx or Lenin. The two rival pigs, Napoleon and Snowball, they become the dictator Joseph Stalin and his rival Leon Trotsky. And the loyal, hard-working horse Boxer, he represents the dedicated but exploited working class. By using a simple barnyard fable, Orwell creates this incredibly precise and devastating retelling of history.
Just listen to this quote from Old Major, which kicks off the whole rebellion. You can practically hear the echoes of real-world revolutionary speeches in there. He gives them this simple, powerful idea: get rid of the oppressor, and paradise will follow. It's the promise of utopia that has fueled revolutions all through history, and Orwell uses the simple language of a fable to explore both its power and its incredible danger.
So we kind of end up back where we started. From Shakespeare's kings to Orwell's pigs, stories have always been the lens we use to make sense of our world and ourselves. They don't just reflect our societies, they can actively shape them. The novel gave ordinary people a voice and a mirror, and in doing that, it also gave them a weapon. And that leaves us with one last thought. If a story about a farm can so powerfully explain a revolution, what are the stories that are shaping our world right now?